record. Okay, so is everybody able to see the screen? If somebody could just give me a quick yell and let me know if you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so hi, how are you guys? Thank you for hopping on tonight. I want to thank Kerrie and the Parsippany Library for hosting the college funding workshop this evening. My name is Jody Bloom. This is my personal contact information, my cell phone, my email address, and this is our website. And I'm really glad that you guys are on tonight because I'm very passionate about making sure that people have a really good understanding about what goes into college planning, because far too often, many people leave, tens of thousands of dollars on the table by not planning far enough in advance or not making the changes they can make to actually help their families. So this is going to be a really educational workshop. Feel free to take notes. You also, at the end, can pop some questions into the chat room. And I always give everybody who attends a workshop the opportunity to come in and meet with me one-on-one or with one of my other colleagues if you prefer, because the things that we're going to cover can be very confusing. And the whole night you're going to be thinking to yourself, well, how does that apply to me? And how does that apply to my family? Because every single family is different. Their children are different, their goals for them are different, and their financial situation is different. So when you're doing college planning, no one plan can look alike or should look alike. So I offer that up to you. One of my colleagues will at some point pop a Survey Monkey into the chat room. And if you can just give us feedback, if you found this helpful and you want to let us know what areas you liked that we covered, terrific, that would be amazing information for us. And if there's some things that you would like to see covered in future presentations, I would love to know that information as well. And then of course, from there, you can certainly sign up for a one-on-one, or you can visit our website. And if you do like the presentation tonight, don't keep it a secret. We have a lot of presentations and workshops that people can sign up for. So if you have a spouse that isn't on, or a friend or family member that you think could benefit from this, they can just go right to the website at www.cornerstonecollegesolutions.net. Okay, so the reason I really got into this is because I don't know about anybody else, but when I came out of undergraduate, I came out with an extraordinary amount of debt. I was raised in a single parent household. My mom worked like 3 jobs to try to put me through school and still came out with a lot of debt for herself. And I had a lot of debt as well. And it took me like well into my marriage, something I'm sure my husband wasn't thrilled about, to be able to pay it off. And I really vowed that if I could help anybody to reduce the amount of debt that a family has to take on to send their kids to college, I wanted to do that. The second reason is I saw a lot of financial planners in the industry that said they were doing college planning, but they were really focused on, a particular type of investment fund, and they weren't really trying to find out what really goes into college planning. And they didn't really delve into people's, personal goals and situation and really figure out what made sense for that family. So, and I wanted to do it differently. So this is the start. We learn a lot tonight, and that's your starting point. So have you saved enough? Now, we work with all kinds of families. Some of our clients have, saved very little and really are approaching that college years, and they're like, whoa, how are we going to do this? Then we have some families that they've saved a lot, but nobody wants to hand the money right over to the school if they don't have to. And they want to protect those funds, right? And then for most people, they fall in the middle, which is, from early on, they started saving, or it's somewhere along the way they started saving, but sort of life gets in the way. And then as you approach these college years, there's often not enough saved. And then the question is, what do we do? So regardless of which category you fall into, if you learn nothing else, tonight than this, I would really recommend that regardless of who you do it with and what you do, after tonight, use this information and start planning, take action, because the longer you wait, the more it's going to wind up costing you. So forget the guilt. Just breathe. I always say, especially when we're in person, I say to people, look, you're going to come off of this workshop tonight and you're probably going to need like a glass of wine or an Advil because, what we're going to talk about can be very stressful. As your children are approaching the college years and preparing all the way from elementary school up through high school, it's stressful for them. But make, no doubt about it, it's very stressful for parents as well. So just breathe. You are going to get through it. There are a lot of amazing colleges, and I'm certain that you're going to find a college that can be the right fit for your children and your family. Keep the blinders on. And when I say this, I mean, you're going to start having a lot of unwarranted and unwelcomed advice from neighbors, friends, family. They're going to start saying things like, you have to apply to University of Miami because little Johnny got a full ride. So you have to do that. Well, a couple of things. Little Johnny might have gotten a full ride, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to apply to your children. Secondly, you're not even sure if they're telling the truth because a lot of people, don't share the full story about how they're getting what they're getting or doing what they're doing. So take the information in, but, keep it to the side. And I highly recommend using the resources available to you and reaching out to professionals who have their area of expertise. Obviously, one of the first places that you're going to start as your children are in the high school years is going to be your guidance counselor and your guidance department. And I hear it all the time, like, well, my guidance counselor isn't helpful. Well, if that's true, then you need to go and request a different guidance counselor because you're either paying for private school or you're paying tax dollars. You want to make sure that your guidance counselor is really guiding you and your child. Secondly, there are people that will use college admissions advisors. Now, I can't tell you whether you want to be doing that or not. There are some really good ones out there, but I do want to say that everybody really needs to stay in their own lane, okay? And when I mean stay in your own lane, I mean, you will never hear me tell you what your children should be writing for their college essay, because that's not my area of expertise. The planning and the saving and the protection, that's my area of expertise. I'm going to give you a perfect example. There's a college admissions advisor who happens to be really good at what she does. And she was working with one of the families that I've been working with for a number of years. They happen to have 4 children. And last October, that family came in and their last child was about to apply for college. And what happened was the college admission advisor recommended that their child apply early decision, which is a legally binding decision, regardless of how much financial, help the school is providing you. And the advisor said to them, listen, I don't want you to jeopardize the acceptance. So don't check off that you want financial aid, and instead get the acceptance first, and you can always apply for financial aid later, which 100% could not have been further from the truth. Thank God this family came in and we had a follow-up meeting in October because I was able to catch them. The school that they were recommending that their child apply to required the financial aid forms to be in by November. And as we will talk about later in this presentation, if you don't submit your financial aid forms on time, you don't even have an opportunity to be eligible. So, all I'm saying is, I'm sure she gave great advice for what schools to apply and, how to help them with their essays, et cetera. But she didn't have a good understanding about the financial aspects. So we all need to just stay in our own lanes and never, ever say yes to your children about schools that they can and should apply to without you knowing the full cost of those schools and, more importantly, how you're going to pay for it. I have seen where families just say, look, my kids are working hard to get into the best school that they can get into, and I just told them to focus on that. I'm going to worry about figuring it out later. Well, sometimes figuring it out later isn't possible. And you either wind up disappointing your children because you ultimately can't afford to send them to a particular school, or they go for a year or two and then only to be called back because the money's not there. So we're going to talk tonight about how do you find the right school to fit your budget. So what do colleges cost today? Let's start off with community school, right? Community colleges, there's a lot of them in New Jersey. They tend to range from about 5,000 to 7,000. Students live at home, they can commute to school. It's a great opportunity for two types of people. One, anybody that really isn't sure they are ready for a four-year college and a full bachelor's degree and might want to just get their feet wet with two-year associate degree and then figure out what they want to do. Or for a family that really is struggling financially, sometimes getting 2 years in at such a low cost gives the families more time to save and to figure out how to pay for the remainder. Excuse me. So next up on the cost ladder is the in-state public schools. And they tend to range from about 15,000 to about 35,000. So like a Rutgers would be around 35 now. And next up on the ladder is the out-of-state public colleges. So these are all those public schools that you hear a lot of the New Jersey students saying they want to apply to, right? I mean, there's tons, but it's your Big Ten, it's a lot of the large state schools. They range from about 30,000 all the way up to about 65,000 now. And on average are about 40, 45,000. And then private colleges, which can go from about 45,000 up to 80,000. Now, the private colleges and universities, the cost is the same whether you live in state or out of state. Makes no difference. Everybody pays the same. So regardless of which schools your kids wind up going to, multiply that times 4 years by the number of children that you have, and that is an astronomical expense. Some people will wind up paying more for college than they've had to lay out for their own primary residence. So it's a lot, and it's not even taking into account inflation. The cost of school is tending to outpace inflation by 2, 3, sometimes 4 times for schools. So what is this? It's a Bed Bath coupon. And the reason why I throw this on here is because I've come to realize that I never ever have to walk into a Bed Bath & Beyond and have to pay full price, because I know there's always a coupon, right? Coming to my home, in my email, they're inside magazines. There's a lot of ways to get these coupons. So I have them in my pocketbook and the side pocket of my door. The reason I have this here is because it's really the same thing with private schools. The price that you just saw, 45 all the way up to, 80, even $85,000 is a lot of money. But most people don't have to pay that amount to go to a private school. The private schools recognize that they, for many students, have to provide a cushion, a discount of sorts, so that it makes it more affordable for families and they become more in line or sometimes even less expensive than a public school. So if you had the idea, hey, we're not letting our kids apply to any private schools, they cost way too much and we can't afford it, I would just caution you to think again, because a lot of times these are the schools that have even more money to provide you with, both on the need-based side and the merit-based side. The average cost of schools have been rising tremendously over the past 40 years and 20 years, as you can see, rising as much as anywhere from 275% all the way up to 400%. It's really, and rising. And a lot of people and a lot of our clients have said, well, what are schools doing this year with the COVID situation? Well, truthfully, there's not that many schools that are lowering their costs. A few have held their costs, but a lot of schools are even making up for the lost revenues they have from last year. Remember that schools are businesses and they have to cover a lot of expenses. So, my children happen to be, I have 2 in college right now and 1 who's a senior in high school. One college raised their rates 4.5% this year and 1 held. So you're seeing things all across the board. What we are not seeing is that the cost of college is going to go away anytime soon. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. We have an incredible amount of unfunded liabilities in our country. We have a lot of stimulus packages that have just been put in place, and there is going to be no place for schools to be covered by the government, at least no time soon. I wish that was not the case, but I would expect that, for all of you, whether your kids are in elementary school, middle school, or high school, that the costs are going to continue to rise as we've seen in the past. Now, one of the first things that we have to really understand when you're thinking about school is understanding what the full, all-inclusive costs of that college or university is. And you can go to the websites for each individual school, but some of them are amazing and they're really transparent, and they, have all the costs laid out for you for a full cost. But some of them make it a little more difficult to figure out, and they do it intentionally because they want to encourage you to apply, for your children to apply. So, some might have, some of the costs, on the admissions page. That might be for tuition, where the housing site might have, what the room and board is going to be. So it gets a little tricky. So when you go to these sites, I really want you to do your research and look for the all-inclusive, cost. Another way is to use, any number of resources online. I personally love the collegeboard.org site because it really allows you to compare apples to apples and to look at the in-state costs and the out-of-state costs very easily as well. And I have found them to be pretty close, either, they might be off a couple $100 on the lower side or the higher side. But for a general idea of what school is going to cost, I like this site a lot. You don't have to have an account for it. You can just go to collegeboard.org. Down at the bottom, you can key in any college or university, and this is going to pop up. You're going to see on the left-hand side, there's going to be a tab, and I want you to click on paying. And when you do that, you're going to see that both the in-state and the out-of-state costs of this school is going to be reflected there. It's not just tuition. They're going to show tuition, an estimate for room and board, incremental fees, books, and some estimates for student spending account, as well as some travel expenses. What it won't include are some extra things like if your kids are going to get involved in club sports or want to get involved in Greek life. There is an expense to some of that. And if they have their heart set on that and you're in agreement with it, then you might want to plan for a little bit more money because you know that that's going to be part of the cost. So this happens to be a private school right here, and it's showing you in the in-state, and if we clicked on this, the out-of-state cost would be the same. But this is a private school, and it's about $65,620. So what's the problem? Well, the cost of school isn't the only problem. There's some other problems as well. First of all, on average, it is taking kids not only just 5.5 years, which is the research from back in 2014, but newer research is showing that it is taking the average US student up to 6 years to graduate from a 4-year undergraduate degree on average, right? So obviously I want all of your kids to get through in 4 years, but that isn't the case. And, so, even an additional semester or, a year, let alone a year and a half or two at any of the prices that we just saw is a lot of money. So that's a problem. Only 41% of students are graduating within 4 years, and 56.6% are graduating within 6 years. Now, each of the universities publishes some information about the percent graduation rates for their school. Years ago, everybody published a 4-year rate, and you wanted to see as close to 100% as possible. But most schools now will actually publish the percent of students that are graduating within 6 years. And some of those numbers are pretty low. So you really want to make sure, when we're going to talk about this in a minute, about how do you identify which schools are going to help you to help your kids get through school in a normal time frame. But why overall is this happening? Well, a number of reasons. The transfer rates tend to be skyrocketing. A couple of studies were done. The Wall Street Journal, National Student Clearinghouse, both did large studies that showed about a third of all students transfer. And those that transfer a very large percentage in the 40% range are transferring more than once. And, you don't think about that. I didn't think about that so much. And then my son was one of the students that had to transfer. So, and why? There's a number of reasons, but know that if your child does transfer, and a lot of times there might be a good reason to transfer. For my son, he went to a school that was very strong in engineering and in medical, and he decided he wanted to be a creative writer and study the film industry. Well, that school wasn't the right school for him then, so he made a change. Now for him, all but one class transferred in terms of credits, but not all schools will take all the credits from your previous school. Therein lies the problem. Now, what are some of the other problems? Sometimes the students are choosing the wrong major or the wrong school for what they want to do, right? And even if they stay at the same school and they spend a lot of time doing the core curriculum for a particular major, some schools, require different curriculum for each major. So when they change course, it sometimes takes them a step back. Some schools are really generous with the amount of electives that students can take. And it's great because, look, this is their opportunity to find what they really love, right? Because that's the most important thing. Find something that they like to do and really go after that. For a lot of us, though, we're still trying to figure that out. It's hard for a 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old to figure out what they want to do with their lives. And when they're given a lot of choices and, they're exploring, some kids, not all, but some can really go, veer off course. So you're going to want to watch that as well. And if a school is expensive and you're expecting that your child is going to work while they're going to school, and there's no wrong or right answer to that, you just have to know that sometimes students aren't able to maintain a full-time work, a full-time class schedule and work at the same time if they're working many hours, or they're not doing as well in the classes, often having to repeat some. So the real goal is finding the right pieces to the puzzle, right? Doing our due diligence now at an early time frame to start thinking about the right academic fit, the right social fit, and please don't leave the financial fit to the last moment either, because that should be, something that's really first and foremost in thinking about what's going to be the right schools for you as a family. And what you do for one child is going to impact not only the other children to come if you have multiple children, but because school is a really large expense, you can't really plan for college without figuring out how is that going to impact retirement and some of the events that we have later in life. Now, what can you do? First of all, we want you to look for schools that have a very high 4-year graduation rate. If a school is showing you a 6-year graduation rate, call them, ask, get onto the information session with your children and ask the question, look, you're sharing a 6-year graduation rate. What's your 4-year graduation rate? Because if you find that they have, a low 4-year graduation rate, then that might not be the right kind of school because they're not helping and encouraging and guiding your children through in a timely manner. So that's first and foremost what you're going to want to do. Now, visit campuses early and often. So I know we have some people online that, have elementary school and some middle school. At this point, you don't have to do anything at this time frame. But as your kids are starting to approach, the late middle school years, the early high school years, I'm not suggesting that you have to sign them up for information sessions and guided tours. But if you happen to be driving through a city or a town that has a university, drive through, park the car, get out, walk around the quad, really see what each of these schools are like. Maybe go into the student center and grab a bite to eat, get a feel for the vibe of the school. You'll be very surprised that early on, your children might tend to gravitate toward one type of school or another. Do they really like, a smaller, more intimate school? Or do they love the big, huge, rah-rah school with a lot of spirit? They like city schools because, that offers a lot of opportunities, different opportunities as well. So you're going to want to start getting an early feel for that. Once they're in 11th or 12th grade, then that is the time to actually start setting up and really doing some research, right? I don't mean to say that you have to, pick up and fly to every school that your child might be considering attending. You don't have to do that. But you could start seeing a number of schools, even if they're in driving distance, to really start to get a feel. Go to the information sessions, sign up for the tours. If there's an opportunity to interview on campus, certainly as a senior, you want to take that opportunity. And also, I really, just as a parent, really highly recommend that your kids either try to sit in on a class while they're at visiting the school to get a feel for what's the interaction with, the professors and the students, or even student to student. Is it a collaborative environment? Is it really, or is it really, did it seem very competitive? Do they have a nice rapport with the professor? You're going to get a lot out of that. Is the content good? Okay, so the other thing is, if there's an opportunity to identify a student that is, that goes to school at that university, hold on one second, I'm just looking to see. Yeah, somebody just asked a question before we move on about the 4-year graduation rate. Yeah, there's going to be, most schools will publish either a 4-year or a 6-year graduation rate on their websites, and they usually share that information during the information session. So if you don't find it, it's okay to pick up the phone and call an admissions rep. And there's a lot of other resources online that track colleges, and so you'll find some good information there. Anyway, the thing I was saying is that if you have an opportunity to identify a student that goes to the schools that you're visiting, try to, encourage your son or daughter to, set up time for lunch or dinner with a student there, or even stay overnight, because you see a real feel for the school. You get to, what is life like as a student? Not from the information session. It's not from somebody that's being paid to give you a tour. This is like real life. What's it like to hang out in the dorm? Is there a party on campus or a club that they're going to visit? What's it like to eat in the dining hall? Now, I recognize that right now it's different in this world. I have a senior, so I know a lot of the schools don't have tours. You might not feel safe bringing them to the schools, but every school has multiple virtual sessions online, both tours, information sessions, even for, individual colleges within majors within. Sometimes some of them are having Q&A opportunities. So, if you have students that are in the junior and senior year, you're going to want to be doing that. And certainly attracts interest for a lot of these schools. They like to see that the students are logging on and, really doing their own homework. But keep in mind this, colleges are businesses. And because they're businesses, they know what it takes to market themselves the right way, or to, get themselves moving up the ranks in the, college listings like US News and World Report. A lot of families get really hyped up about that. And you're going to start, as you're approaching the high school years, a lot of people talk about that. But I really caution you on that. Listen, it's nice to see some general rankings, like where does a school stand? But the truth is, you should develop your own criteria for your kids. Is it the right kind of school that might have multiple interest areas for your children, right? So they might have an intended major, they might even go in undecided, but if you identify a few areas that they love, is that school going to be able to meet all of those interests so that they don't have to leave the school, right? And, is it the right kind of, career opportunities following it, or the right, alumni connections and network? There's a lot of things that go into the right criteria for each school, for each individual child. Now, I'm going to give you an example. Tulane. I happen to love that university, and it has nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you, because I don't want you to think I don't think highly of this school. It's a great school. But a couple of years back, Tulane saw the opportunity to make their application free to every applicant. And that was terrific. So what do you think happened? Students that weren't sure if they wanted to go there or not, they were like, it's free. I'll just send in an application. It's on the Common App. And parents were like, all right, it's not going to cost me any more money. go ahead and apply. Because by the way, to apply to schools, it's about $65 to $75 per school. So it's nice when there's a free one. Now, what happened was they started to get a whole lot more applications for the same amount of spots. And what did that do? It started to make them appear as a more selective university. Now, are they doing other things to make them more selective? I'm sure. But definitely the applications being free was one thing that really helped them to start showing up as a more selective university and started moving up in the ranks. So I'm just showing you, that these schools are businesses. So just make your own criteria and don't get too crazed by the rankings that some of these magazines and organizations put together. Okay, so when you start thinking about how am I going to pay for school, there's a lot of different resources that families tend to be able to pull from. Now, the first is student or parent investments in the market, right? So that could be mutual funds, equities, bonds, any kind of market investment. Then there's savings, whether it's checking, a savings account, under the mattress, anything like that, even CDs, if anybody's still using a CD. Those are all areas, one source of resources to think about how are we going to pay for college. The second is student loans. And we're going to talk about student loans in just a moment, but the amount of college debt that is in this country is mind-blowing. It is exceeding $1.5 trillion, $1.5 trillion. But I want to tell you something. That is not just true student debt. That's college debt. And a lot of that debt is actually the parent debt. So that's another area that we pull resources from to pay for school, right? So parents are often having to borrow. One of the places they can borrow, and have some college loans from is a private bank. And sometimes they tend to, publish some, lower rates than the federal parent loans. But it's a little harder to get it because those rates might change as they start to do their credit checks. And the repayment terms may not be as flexible down the road, potentially some of the government loans. But if you're able to get a lower interest rate, all the power to you. And then there's something called the PLUS loans, which are the government loans. Just like the government provides some student loans, the government provides these loans called PLUS loans, parent loans for undergraduate studies. Okay, so that's one area, and we're going to talk about that in a moment as well. And then what are the two other areas that a lot of people have resources in that many people start to save in those areas when they're very young? It's the retirement funds, things like 401ks, 403bs, 457s, simple plans, set plans. These are qualified retirement funds. And so we've all heard early on, put as much money into your retirement funds as you can, which is great when you're thinking about retirement, not so great when you're thinking about college, because getting to those funds is more difficult, right? You're very limited in what you can borrow out of those funds. It often comes at a penalty of 10% if you're younger than 59 and a half. And it comes with the idea that you have to first pay taxes on it. So if you're looking at an account that's $100,000, it's really not $100,000 because you have to pay your income tax first. So that's one area that there's a lot of savings in, and sometimes people have to draw upon, but also the brick and mortar of their homes, right? We've always, said, all right, we're going to take a mortgage and we're going to pay off that mortgage as soon as we can. And that's really great to have a nice, asset like that. Unfortunately, when it comes to college, it's not an asset you can easily get to the funds. So sometimes people do have to borrow against their home, but if you have to sell it, it may not even be an ideal opportunity. But all things that get taken into consideration when you're looking at an overall college plan. And then this is the sweet spot, scholarships and grants. This is the free money that you either get from need-based financial aid or from merit aid. And we will talk a whole lot about both of those tonight as well. And then gifts from grandparents or other family members. If you have that or you have somebody that is saving for your children, that's fantastic. When we're working with our clients, we spend some time figuring out how and when is that best to be distributed to your student, because you don't want it to hurt you from a financial aid or merit aid standpoint. And so how and when and where those other relatives are saving is important. And then 529s, this is another area to save in. These were developed back in the late 1980s as a way for the government to provide an incentive to families to start saving for college. And in doing so, it is a market investment, but the gains inside of that, if the funds are used for educational purposes, is tax-free. So, and that's a nice benefit. However, do keep in mind that the 529s are a market investment, and even if you're using an age-based fund or getting more conservative as you approach the college years, just like a regular investment or a 401k or other retirement investment, they can take a hit when there's a big market correction. And, history does tend to repeat itself. So some people can do very well on them, but if they take a big market hit to those funds, you may not have enough time to recover while those tuition bills are landing on your kitchen table. So we take a look at all of this and some other, areas for overall college resources. So let's delve into this idea of student loans. So as I mentioned, it's very limited in terms of true student debt. Students can only borrow up to $5,500 as freshmen, $6,500 as a sophomore, and $7,500 for junior and senior year respectively. So for a total of about $27,000. And in order to be eligible for those loans, you have to be applying for financial aid and you cannot miss the deadlines. So let me say that again. If you want to be considered for financial aid, even if it's just for the loans, you have to be in it to win it, just like the lottery. And it's important to know that you do have to make those deadlines. Those deadlines are going to differ for every school, and those deadlines are going to change based on how you are applying, your student is applying, whether they're applying early decision, early action, or regular decision. Now, so they can take up to $5,500. Those loans are called Stafford loans, or federal direct subsidized and federal direct unsubsidized loans. The difference between those two is when the interest rate starts to accrue. If it is an unsubsidized government loan, federal loan, that interest is going to start to accrue the moment that the funds are distributed to the school. Typically, that's twice a year. And right now, the rate is 2.75%. There's also an opportunity for this federal direct subsidized loan. And that subsidized loan means that it's going to be the same interest rate right now for the 2020-2021 school year. It's 2.75%, the lowest rate in history. It's fantastic. But that interest doesn't start to accrue until the student graduates from school. And the typical repayments, there are a lot of ways to set up a repayment schedule. There's, income-based repayment plans, et cetera. But for the most part, a lot of people start off with a 10-year amortization, which starts 6 months after graduation. So when we talk about all this college debt, where's it all coming from? Well, the government, assuming that you haven't had a bankruptcy or a major credit issue of some sort, the government will provide loans all the way up to the full cost of school, which, by the way, is one of the reasons that the universities don't have any incentive to lower the costs, because they know people can just borrow up to the full amount. And if you need to, you can. Hopefully, if you're working with somebody like myself, we're looking for ways to minimize the amount that you have to borrow. And if you do have to borrow, how is that debt going to get repaid after school? Now, the loans we're talking about, that most of that college debt is the Federal Plus loans that, parent loan for your undergraduate students, right? So, and that rate right now is 5.3%. And again, there are, similar repayment schedules. Often people can extend that amortization out, for 20 years. Sometimes people want to prepay loans. There's a whole lot of things you can do. You can consolidate eventually, but each year the interest rate is set for that loan, and that loan for that year will carry that same interest rate until graduation and then beyond. Now, can we afford this? Well, you really have to decide your budget, not the college. All too often, our clients come in and they say, well, the school is going to cost this amount, and now I have to figure out how to make that work. Well, that's terrific, but that really, should be reversed. You should be figuring out how much you can afford for school, and then figuring out which are the right schools that are going to fit within your budget. Now, when we talk about budget, I'm talking about two things. First is your overall budget right now for what you, and if you are married or if you have an ex, what combined you're going to have available to contribute to school. Now, I had a partner a while back, and he sat down with his wife, and the two of them decided that they had about $30,000 to contribute to each of their two children for 4 years of school, and for each of those 4 years. And they sat down and they spoke to their children about it and said, look, he said, Mom and I have sat down. We're going to come up with $30,000 for you. If you have a school that's going to cost more than that, then you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to find a way to get merit aid at the schools that you're looking at. And if you can't, we're going to have to figure out a school that fits within the budget. So they really appreciated that, because they understood that part of that, if they had a love for a particular school, was they were going to have to, one, work really hard to be the best kind of student they could be, and potentially get merit aid. So you decide the budget. Take the time and do it now. Look, you may not have all the answers, but have a starting point. And if you have a lot of time to plan, you're going to make some projections for what you think you're going to have available by that time. Now, the other budget that I need to talk to you about is your monthly budget. It's really important, no matter how old your children are, right now, to do a monthly cash flow analysis. Look, when I talk about it and I say, okay, I want you to do a monthly budget, people look at me and they're like, that's a dirty word. Don't talk to us about budgets. Everybody hates doing it. I hate doing my own budget. But it's really important to take a look at how much income is coming into your household on a monthly basis, and what are your real expenses, and what do you have left over at the end of the month to put away for school. And if you don't have enough, where are those areas that you might be able to make some adjustments to, so that you can figure out what a savings plan, how you can start a savings plan or increase what you're already doing. Now, no matter what the budget is, you are going to find the right school. Just, get rid of the guilt, because I know you all want to do right by your children. The fact that you are on this workshop right now shows me that. So don't do this. This is not a college plan. Burying your head in the sand is not acceptable. Really, when you get off of this tonight, I want you to commit to yourself that, starting tomorrow morning, you're going to take a look at your college plan. And again, that doesn't just mean like, just quickly throwing money into an account and hoping and praying that it builds enough to get you there. It's a lot of aspects to this, in terms of how can you maximize your aid? How do you protect your funds? How do you help them grow? Where is it best to borrow from if you have to? But just don't do this. It won't get you anywhere, and it will wind up costing you money. And I do want to tell you that studies really do show that there are a whole lot of people out there who say to themselves early on, I'm not going to be eligible for financial aid. I don't even think my kids are going to be eligible for merit aid. We're just not going to have any of that. And so you ignore it. Well, the truth is that there really is a lot of savings you can have if you just understand the financial aid process, both merit and need-based. Okay, so how do you fund school? Well, we're going to talk about private scholarships. We're going to talk about need-based financial aid, merit-based financial aid, and what are the characteristics of a strong, proper college savings plan. Okay, so I'm going to just read this really quickly because there's a lot of discussion about private scholarships and a lot of misconceptions out there. So this happens to be from a private school admissions officer, and they shared this. My problem isn't with private scholarships, but with a suggestion that if only students applied to enough of them, they'd be able to pay for college and avoid large amounts of debt. Of course, there will be some students who receive enough scholarships to pay for college, and if you have the time to apply, you should. But the truth about scholarships is that most students would be better off if they used their time figuring out which schools are most likely to give them the most money before they even ever apply for admissions or for private scholarships. So why is this? Okay, so understand this, that the private scholarships are independent, non-college controlled gifts. This is the aid that comes from outside of the government and outside of the universities themselves. They're funded by foundations or corporations or philanthropists. These are some of the civic organizations and the religious organizations that you might belong to, your employers. And there's some decent amount of money out there, but there's some misconceptions about how much money people actually get. Approximately only 1 in 8 students will receive a scholarship for a bachelor's degree program. Only 1 in 8. And few students have that, got a free ride from a private scholarship, right? Only 1.5% obtain enough scholarships or grants to cover the full cost of attendance. Only 1.5%. And of all undergraduate students in the United States, only 0.1%, okay, got $25,000 or more in scholarships, and 97% of scholarship recipients receive $2,500 or less. And we tend to see that those smaller scholarships that the students are getting, they range from about $250 to about, up to $5,000, but the majority, it's $2,500 or less. Now, doesn't mean that you shouldn't explore that. It just means that there's a lot of other ways to find out how to get more money. Now, if you do want your kids to apply for private scholarships, there's a couple of things you can do. You can look at a number of online resources. FastWeb is one of them. Scholarship.com is another. My website, cornerstonecollegesolutions.net, has a resource tab. We have some listed there. I'm about to update that with some more resources. So feel free to go check that out. You never should have to pay anybody to provide you with a list of scholarships. That information is readily available online. All your student has to do is key in some information about themselves, their religious background, their ethnicity, their, what they love, what kind of sports or talents they have. And you'll see that you can get information about a lot of different scholarships, but they often require a lot of essays and a lot of time to prepare. So just understand that. Your guidance counselor should have a list of local scholarships available. And also, if you do want to just sit around with your extended family and ask about all of the affiliations that everybody in the family has, where they work, or whether their employer provides something, do they volunteer somewhere where they might be giving scholarships to some of the volunteers' family members. So take a look at that. But again, this is a very small amount of money. And, one thing I want to mention too is that some of the financial aid departments actually will reduce your financial aid package and offering by the amount of the private scholarship. So you got to be careful there as well too. So how do we figure out if we're eligible for aid? Now, look, a lot of people, as I mentioned, say, I'm not eligible, I make too much money, or I have too many assets. Well, you should know this. There is no income cutoff for applying for financial aid. And even applying for financial aid can potentially help you on the merit side as well, believe it or not. And we'll talk about that later. But how do the schools and the government figure out if you're eligible for aid? So before we go on and we talk about the formulas, I want you to know a couple of things that are really important. You should jot this down. There are two types of financial aid documents that people potentially have to fill out. One is called the FAFSA. That's the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And that's to get the government funds, right? Every single school will require the FAFSA, every school. Now, there's another form called the CSS profile form, and that's provided by the College Board, the site that I often go to for a lot of information. So that College Board offers this form it delves a lot deeper into your finances, and sometimes it can be very intimidating for people, but please, I caution you on that, because the schools that are requiring the profile form, and that's about 350 plus schools. Those are some of the bigger private schools, as well as some of the large state schools. They're going to potentially be able to give more. They might have larger endowments. They might meet more of the demonstrated need. So they're digging a little deeper. It's okay, because even though they're digging more, they're tending to get, to give more. So what we're going to talk mostly about tonight is the FAFSA, because everybody is going to use the FAFSA form to apply. So first off is figuring out the cost of attendance, the COA. We talked about that before. You really want to know and to do your research to know what's the full cost, right? Everything, including the miscellaneous fees, because those can add up a couple $1,000 extra, and over 4 years plus, that adds up. So you're going to know your cost of attendance. Then what gets subtracted from the cost of attendance is something called the EFC, and that stands for the expected family contribution. That's a number that is going to be calculated when you complete your FAFSA form. And when you subtract your EFC from the overall cost of attendance for each university, you are showing a demonstrated need. So what is this EFC, and how do you figure out, well, what goes into that? How do I know if I'm going to be eligible? Well, there's a couple of different ways. First of all, you can really start to figure that out yourselves. There's some online resources, FAFSA Forecaster, which is provided by the government. Each school is required to have something called a net price calculator on their websites. Some are easier to use than others. We do an estimated expected family contribution for all of the people that we meet with one-on-one. You're going to want to start to have an understanding of what goes into that, because there are a lot of things that families can do, especially if you have time, to lessen the expected family contribution and increase your demonstrated need in the eyes of the schools. And you can do that legitimately. So just know this, the expected family contribution is derived from a calculation that comes from 4 areas. It's really parent assets, parent income, student assets, and student income. Those 4 things, as well as how many people in your household and how many students that you have in college at any one time. Those are all going to figure into your expected family contribution. The more income and assets you have, the higher your expected family contribution, which means that you have less need. If you have lower expected family contribution, which is what we try to help you figure out, then that means that you are going to have a higher demonstrated need, hopefully showing the schools that, that you're looking for more and they could potentially give you more. So here's just a quick example. If the overall cost of school is about $45,000 and you subtract out from that the expected family contribution, the demonstrated need is showing $20,000. So this EFC is what that school is, the schools are expecting that you're going to be able to come up with. Now, sometimes people will say to me, okay, well, that's crazy because I can't come up with that. I don't have that. What do I do? That's part of college planning. Okay, this is an example of what gets kicked out at the end when you complete the FAFSA. So the FAFSA becomes available every year on October 1st. And You go online, your student is going to create something called an FSA-ID, which is really an ID number. And technically, the FAFSA is supposed to be completed under the student's FSA-ID. I would highly recommend that you do not, under any circumstances, have your child doing those forms because, one, they're not going to understand how the form needs to get completed. Two, different families, share different amount of financial information. It can get confusing. You may not want to, be that open with your kids about, all the details of your finances. Only you can do that, but you're going to really want to fill that form out yourself. Now, when you're done, and oh, by the way, it's not an overly complicated form if you don't have an overly complicated situation. If you do, and you have a number of different businesses or, different financial issues, it might get a little bit more complicated. There are some companies or individuals that will help you to complete the financial aid forms if you need, but most people are able to figure it out on their own. There's also a data retrieval button that you can click, which will download your IRS tax returns directly to the FAFSA. So you really only have to populate information for assets and some of your personal information. Okay, so when you're done, the FAFSA kicks out this form. It's called a student aid report. And everybody says, well, I don't know how much my expected family contribution was. I mean, where did you even find that? So I like to show this form so that you can see. So take a look at my cursor. This little thing that says EFC with a colon looks like a serial number. People, and it's so small, people typically just go right over it and move past it. But that's really what your expected family contribution is. In this case, it was 030,804, which is $30,804. Now, that number can change every year because you will have to reapply for financial aid every year. So some years you might be eligible for more, which is great, and some years you might be eligible for less based on your income and assets. One thing I want to make certain that you are aware of is that the tax returns that you're going to use is really a 2-year look back period. So think about the age, the year that your children are going to enter school. So if you have a senior right now, your children are going to enter school, most of them, in the fall of 2021. You always go 2 years back, and you know that that's the financial aid form that you have to use the prior year. So if you have a senior right now, you're using the 2019 tax returns. So one, you have to make sure you file on time. And two, you have to make sure that you understand that, because sometimes we do have ways of how we can influence how much shows up in our income. You might decide not to sell certain assets because that income might generate too much. Or you might have a bonus that your boss could potentially say, well, we could pay it in December or January. That might make a difference. So we always look at all of that when we are looking to determine how eligible the families that we work with are going to be. Okay, so let me just move this down. Okay, so the starting point was that cost of attendance, right? And then we're going to figure out our expected family contribution. Now we're going to talk about what assets get included in the FAFSA and which ones get excluded in just a couple of minutes. But the next thing you want to do is to figure out, of the schools that we're considering, how generous are each of those schools? And they can be very different. Public schools don't tend to give as much money. I mean, a New Jersey school might be different, but an out-of-state public school tends not to give a lot of financial aid. The private schools tend to give a bit more. So you want to, but those differ as well. You're going to want to do some research here. So again, I like to go back to the College Board because it gives me a good indication of how these schools are operating. When you go to collegeboard.org and you key in any university, on the side, you are going to go to that paying tab to first see what it costs. And at the top of the page, you're going to see something that says financial aid by numbers. And what it's going to kick out is a form that's going to appear on your screen like this. The first place I want you to draw your attention to is here. What percent of the demonstrated need that you have, does that school claim to meet? Now, this school is great because they're saying, look, if you have a demonstrated need, on average, we tend to meet 100% of that need. Some schools will not show anywhere near 100%. Some might show 92, some might show 78, some might show 57%. I had a client, their child wanted to attend High Point University. I don't remember the specific figures, but I think this was in the high 50, low 60% range. So you're going to want to make sure that the schools that you're looking at have as close to 100% as possible. Now, that's just the financial need that they're meeting. How is that comprised? So I want you to come over to this pie chart. Doesn't look exactly round right now, but it is supposed to be a round pie chart. The green area is the free money. Again, that's the sweet spot that we talked about. That's the money that gets given to a student and doesn't have to be returned, right? It's not a loan. It's not something you're borrowing. It's the free money. Now, you want this number to be as close to 100% as possible, right? So this school is pretty good. 100% of need met. 82% of the financial aid packages is with scholarships and grants. That's pretty terrific. There's some that look even better than that, but there's a lot of schools that look worse. And you're going to want to know that ahead of time because a school might cost less money, but when you go to figure out how generous they are as a college or university, you might find that you're going to pay a lot more at that school than you would a higher price school. So also on this page, you can see here what's the average first year financial aid package. And that's sort of the all-inclusive grants, loans, scholarships, and college work study. When it's not the free money, they're talking about loans and work study. So work study, for those of you that don't know, is a pretty small amount. It tends to range from about $1,500 all the way up to about $2,500 or so. And basically they're saying, look, if your child wants to work on campus, we're going to try to make a job available to them, and they're going to make an hourly, earn an hourly wage, and they can earn up to that amount that the college work study has given you. Very few parents wind up seeing the kids sending money home to help pay for college, but it is a good opportunity to help cover some of their personal expenses. And studies do show that kids that work on campus, and again, I'm not talking a gazillion hours, I'm talking about, a small amount of hours to help, get to that $1,500 or $2,500 for the year. Those students tend to perform better in school because they really need to step up and be a little bit more organized and know when they need to get their work done because they know they have to get to a job sometimes. So the other area to draw your attention to is down on the right-hand side. This will show for each school what the average need-based loan is, the average need-based scholarship or grant, and the average non-need-based aid. So that's where some of the merit aid comes into play. Now, this information can be shared by the schools as well. And if it's not that clear, you can always check these numbers against, during the presentations that you'll hear at school, or you can call the financial aid office, but it's pretty close. Okay, so what's this whole idea of what's the college funding process? So really you start with that budget that we talked about, both the monthly budget to see what's left over at the end of the month to save, as well as are there other areas to identify that could be like a lump sum that you might get? Sometimes people are like, look, I don't really have anything. And we talk about, well, do you have, some tax refunds at the end of the year? Maybe that's where you can start saving from. So there's a lot of areas to consider, but you're going to want to know what your area of savings is going to be. You also want to determine an overall budget for what you as a family are willing to contribute for each child each year, regardless of how much that is. Then you want to determine if you're eligible for financial aid and merit aid. Now, we are going to talk about merit aid tonight, of course, but I will often hear people say, well, my kid's an average kid and they're not at the top of their class, so I'm never getting merit aid. Well, That's not true. You don't have to be at the top of the high school class in order to be eligible for merit aid. You just have to be at the top of the applicant pool for any particular college that you're looking at. So we are going to talk about that a little bit later. Now, how and where you save makes a huge difference. We are going to talk about where are these assets that you have to report and where are assets that you don't have to report. And what goes into a college planning process and a real college plan are a number of things. The first is you want to be doing something that helps you to maximize your financial aid, not hurting you. So while you're saving and trying to have your money grow, you don't want it to be hurting you on the financial aid side, right? So there are some ways to do that. You also want to be able to have as much access to funds without penalty. We talked a little bit about the retirement funds, which comes at a penalty of 10% and having to pay taxes. We talked about potentially the 529 funds. If you overfund that and your kids do wind up getting scholarships or grants, or go to a less expensive school than you anticipated, if you use some money out of that fund, that will come at a penalty of 10%. So there's a lot of areas that you can have that are more liquid and some that are less liquid and some that come with penalties. And then protecting against market risk. I cannot emphasize this enough. I am certain that all of you have heard that as you approach retirement, you really need to get a little bit more conservative, right? Because people can't lose a lot of money right before they start to retire. That might require them to work for an extra 10 years or have to change the type of lifestyle they were hoping to have. Well, the same goes for college. If all of your money is at risk, and I'm not suggesting that that's the case with everybody, but if you're not diversified enough, then, and you have a good amount of assets that are at risk, and for some reason, there happens to be a major market correction when your child is approaching that time for school, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot. So, looking at your finances, it's important to be diversified in a number of different areas so you can protect your funds. And then to the extent possible, can you save tax-free? In some vehicles you can. And how do you minimize the amount of the debt? You want your college plan to help you to really only be required to borrow what you absolutely have to, and thinking creatively and out of the box so that you don't have to borrow and get into a lot of debt. I've seen this happen where people, take on so much that they become overwhelmed and get themselves into a very bad predicament. So a college plan is going to look at all of that to ensure that that doesn't happen. I'm just going to take a moment to look at the chat room. There were a couple of questions. What's the right time to start researching for schools, and what are different criteria to look for? Okay, so I'm going to hold that to the end because I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of that as part of this, but we can also talk about that, offline in a one-on-one. And what kind of college savings plans to opt for based on options you're suggesting? Okay, so look, there's no hard, fast rule that I can say to you, hey, you all should be in X, to save for school, because it's very different. I'm telling you, I said it before, but every family has a different financial situation, and every single financial plan that we put together for somebody to plan for college and then into retirement is going to look very different because everybody's finances are different and their goals are different. And so that's why I say, take this all in. And again, you're welcome to come in. I encourage it to come in for a free consultation, and we can talk about some of that and how some of this applies to your specific situation. So how do you calculate how much need you have? Well, the EFC is determined by that calculation. We talked about income and assets for both parent and student. This is how it works. You're going to start off with parent income, and that's your adjusted gross income. And there really is a range for how much. The more you make, the higher a percentage they take into consideration for the expected family contribution. But for most families, it tends to be around the 22 to 25% range. And They do have, a little bit of an income protection allowance before they, look at all of your income. But for the most part, it's about figuring about 20 to 25%. Now, then you look at student income. Now, student income comes at a higher penalty. If your child has made over $6,000 a year. Now, I know a lot of you are probably laughing, going, $6,000. I wish my kid made $6,000, right? But believe it or not, some have. I've seen, sometimes we get somebody that works really hard over a summer and earns a good amount of income, where they have an internship that's paid and they get a lot, or they have income that can come from some assets. If something was sold and they're showing income. So when there's income over $6,000, that income is going to come at 50% toward the EFC calculation, because the colleges are saying, look, this is your education, guys. You're going to have to put a little bit more in. We expect you to sort of step up. So that you should know. Now, parent assets is 5.64% after what's called an asset protection allowance. Now, the asset protection allowance is a fairly small amount, and it differs by, basically is based on the age of the eldest parent. And it's not a huge amount of money. I mean, it could be around $10,000, $15,000 or so. And after that, all the reportable assets will be included at 5.64%. But take a look at student assets. So now you're seeing this comes at a significant penalty again, just like income did, so are assets. If assets are held in your student's name, in your child's name, they are going to have to contribute 20% a year toward the EFC. Now, so for example, let's say there's an investment in your student's name, and a lot of our accountants over time, for some people have recommended that we put assets into our student's name, our child's name, rather than our own, because for tax purposes, it might have made sense. And again, I'm not an accountant. They might have known that back then it did make sense. As you're approaching the college years, having assets in your kids' names actually hurts you. So if there's a $30,000 investment at the 20% contribution to the EFC for the formula, that's going to be $6,000 a year. Over 4 years, that same $30,000 asset is going to cost you about $24,000. Now, imagine this. If that asset was able to be a parent asset instead of a student asset, that would only come at 5.64%, which is a little less than $1,700 a year instead of the $6,000. That's a huge savings over 4 years. Now, by no stretch of the imagination am I suggesting that you run and start moving assets around. That is with the help of a college planner and figuring out if that makes sense or not. I'm just trying to point out that where you place your assets can influence how much the school is expecting you to contribute. Now, that same asset that potentially might have just been able to not be a student asset and might be a parent asset might even be a better asset if it's an asset that doesn't have to be reported on the financial aid forms. We also look for those opportunities as well. That is very key when it comes to planning for college. So let's talk about what assets are we talking about. Now, I want to be very clear that this is a chart that really refers to the FAFSA. The profile form, as I mentioned, will take into consideration more information from you about your assets. And so I'll try and point a couple of things out, but just know that for the most part, we're focusing on FAFSA. Excuse me for one sec. Okay. So what are the assets that you have to include in the FAFSA form? Now, remember, it's a government form. Be very careful. While there's definitely some things you can do and you can plan ahead of time, just know financial aid officers are very sophisticated, and based on the income that they see, if you don't declare certain assets, but they should have been declared and they're showing up as having some income, they're going to say, well, where are these assets? And they figure it out. And they'll call and ask you questions. So what's included? Well, all of your market investments that you might have some equities, some stocks, bonds, you might have might have mutual fund accounts, anything in your brokerage accounts. Those are all included in the FAFSA form. Then any of your savings. So think about your checking, your savings accounts, CDs, if anybody is still using them. You could, technically you're supposed to even talk about what's under your mattress. I think you can be a little more flexible in that area, but really, like, what savings do you typically have? Then your 529s, the asset that we said that some people have that they've been saving for college in. Interestingly, it gives you a tax benefit. At the same time, it does have to get considered, it is considered an asset. Now, years ago, it was considered a student asset because it was for the benefit of the student. But make note about this. If you do have a 529 and you are filling out your financial aid forms, that is 100% going to be put in as a parent asset. Because a number of years ago, the government said, look, we want it to be included we don't want to penalize so much for your savings. We're going to make it a parent asset, not a student asset. So even if it's in you're saving for one particular student or, all of them, you have to report all of the 529 money. Other real estate. Now, but before we move off, 529s, one of the biggest mistakes that we see on filling out the financial aid forms is with that 529. So again, it's a parent asset. Now, I say other real estate here because the FAFSA does not require you to include the equity in your primary residence as an asset. That's great. So if you have a lot of equity in your home, that's terrific. Doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt you on the FAFSA form. You will have to report that on the profile form, however, just to make a note of that. But the other real estate, these are, if you have multiple residences, vacation homes, if you have any of those rental income properties that are owned by you, then that's going to be included. UTMA and UGMA accounts and trust funds all have to get included. UTMA and UGMA accounts are basically custodial accounts in your name for the benefit of your children, and that is going to be an asset. Excluded from the FAFSA form are the retirement funds. The things that we're talking about are really truly identified as qualified retirement funds. Your IRAs, your 401k, your 403bs, and all those other, retirement fund plans that you get through your own company or your employers. Then anything that is a retirement fund that's a pension or annuity, that also will not be included. It's excluded. And then life insurance values, that is not the death benefit of a life insurance policy. That is the amount of cash that is built up inside certain types of permanent life insurance policies. That does not get included in the FAFSA or the profile form. And then, as I mentioned, you get to exclude your primary residence on the FAFSA. And then family-owned business, we get a lot of questions about that. If you own 50% or more of the family in a business and you have less than 100 employees, then you don't have to report the value of that company on your FAFSA. You will be required on your profile form to talk about all of your, personally owned companies and or partnerships. So that will be asked. But on the FAFSA, it is excluded as long as it meets that criteria. And then personal property. We see a lot of errors here. Look, when you're filling out your financial aid forms, this is the time to appear to have the least amount of money possible, right? This is not where you want to be boastful. This is where you want to say, like, okay, we don't have that much. Personal property, do not include things like your cars, your jewelry, your artwork, your collectibles, your televisions. Those are, furniture. Those are your personal assets that are unique to your family, and nobody's expecting that you're going to up and sell all of that so that you can send your child to school. So that's excluded. Now, what are some of the really common mistakes that people make when they're planning for college? One, seeking advice from people who aren't qualified to give it. A lot of people are going to give you advice. Ignore it unless you know you're taking it from a professional and it's the right professional, somebody that focuses on that area. Assuming you won't qualify and failing to apply. Again, studies have really shown a lot of people would be eligible for a lot of money if they just gave it a shot and figured out now how to get the most they could. Not having a defined savings plan or strategy in place, that really should go up straight up to the top. That's the biggest no-no when it comes to planning for school. Accumulating assets in your child's name. So you now know that that's not necessarily the best way to do it when you're going to be applying. So you have to look elsewhere, and where else can you place assets? Can it be in something that's in the parent name, and can it be off of the financial forms in total? Saving in accounts that are included in the FAFSA formula. So we're giving you this information. Now you have to sit down, and we're working with our clients. We're looking at everything, really trying to think outside the box where you can save and how best to do that. And hopefully not doing it in a reportable way. Don't miss the deadlines. Your financial aid deadlines are different for every school. We talked about that, but nonetheless, I see it happen. And there is no calling, kicking, screaming, begging, pleading, anything that you can do with a financial aid officer if you haven't gotten your financial aid forms in on time. So please don't miss those dates. I literally make a spreadsheet. I have a senior, I do the same thing. We make a spreadsheet every school. We look at every admission deadline, and we look at every financial aid deadline. And borrowing more than you can afford. Guys, this is just an undergraduate degree. Some of your kids are going to want to go on to grad school. Some parents want to be able to help with that. I'm not saying you have to, but they may want to go on. You have other life events and retirement to look forward to, a way of life that you want to keep going or even starting to improve. Don't do it all for the, for the diploma on the wall, because your kids can get a great education at so many places, and you can find the right fit. Allowing other relatives to make payments directly to the college. Never. If the financial aid office receives a check from, grandma so-and-so, they're going to say, wow, they've got grandparents with deep pockets. Maybe they don't need as much as they're showing. And then if my child gets into their dream school, we just want to help them, and we're going to do everything possible to just figure it out. Well, that is not a good plan. Now, whether or not you are eligible for financial aid, there's always merit aid. Now, sometimes people will say, well, will it hurt me if I apply for financial aid? And what if I'm really not that eligible? Should I apply anyway? Well, there is some evidence that, that having applied for financial aid might help on the merit side, because at the end of the day, if there's money being given to students on the merit side, and there are two families, one that needs financial aid and one that can pay out on their own, they might be more willing to give it to the family that is stating that they need some help. So how do you determine what financial aid is, what merit-based aid is, and how do you figure out how your kids can be eligible for it? Well, let's just talk about it for a second. Merit aid really just means that the schools are looking at your children, and they're assessing whether your kids are the ones that they really, really, really want to have on campus. They see your kid as a major asset to their campus community. And why would they do that? Because they really excel for the applicant pool. They're at the top of the applicant pool in terms of academics, and they might have some other special talents or, are amazing leaders. That all goes into the merit aid. And what the merit aid is basically saying is, we're going to give you some free money because we want you that badly, right? We want your student, your child, to be living here on campus and attending this school because we think they're going to contribute so much. That's how you have to do it. It's a gift from the school because they think you're really special. Now, all our kids are special, right? But we want to make sure that if we want merit aid, we're going to be having our kids be really, 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 really special in terms of that applicant pool for that school. Okay, so let's talk. So what does that mean? So this idea of understanding what the average is for each school in terms of the people that are admitted to the school and attend the school. And they publish this readily. Every website is going to have what their middle 50% is. They'll say average SAT score is such and such. The average ACT score is X, Y, and Z. And the average GPA is blah, 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 blah. okay? They're going to hand it over to you and let you know. Now, you know if your child is not above that average, an above average student for that school, they're likely not going to be eligible for merit aid. So does your child have to be, again, at the top of their high school class to get merit aid? No, you just have to identify the right schools to be able to show them as one of the better students in the applicant pool. So this is, was published on a website. This school was a private school, and they show it right here. They call it right out, 16,198 applications in the prior year to fill 1,670 spots. And this is really interesting. They say, look, 10% of our admitted freshman applicants, 72% of our admitted freshman applicants ranked in the top 10% of their high school class. That's a large amount, 72%. And then they go on to say, and 93% were in the top 20% of their high school class. Well, if you know that your students in the third decile or the fourth decile or the fifth, and their average for for their high school class, they're likely not getting into this school. They might get in, but they're not going to get merit aid. Let me correct myself. They're not going to necessarily get merit aid. They could get in, but they might not get the free money. Now, they will also show you the mid-range for their SAT scores, mid-range for their SAT scores, and their GPA. Now, each of your high schools, now some of you have younger children, so you don't know about this yet, but each high school has a software package that they use, or at least most high schools. And they let the students in the high school, probably around junior year, early junior year, they have them create a login, and they also will make it available to the parents. And that resource that they have basically not only will tell you, some information about the middle 50 for the colleges and universities, but they will also show you where your child ranks compared to all the other applicants from your high school. So they'll even have a grid that will show, a line graph, which will show standardized test scores and GPA, and it will show every single applicant from that high school, whether they were admitted, whether they were accepted, whether they were attended, whether they were declined, and they will show you exactly what their GPAs and their standardized testing scores are, because you're not only competing with the rest of the high schools in the country, you're also competing within your own high school, and understanding where you fit in the applicant pool overall and how you fit within your own high school is going to be very important to let you know how to find those schools to give you the most amount of money. So over time, you're going to hear this idea of safety schools and target schools and reach schools. And it really makes sense. Now, look, there's no guarantee that you get into a safety school or that you don't get into a reach school. Sometimes things happen, but for the most part, knowing the criteria for the schools and knowing where their average students fall and knowing where your student stands is going to give you an idea whether you're applying to a safety school, a target school, or a reach school. So where do you think you're going to get the most merit aid from? Well, that's going to be over here on the right-hand side. This is where your child is going to be at least in the top 0.25% of all the applicants of a school, because those are the students that the schools are saying, hey, these are the people that we want to pay to come here. So that's the safety school. So if your children are tending to only want to put on their list, target schools, which means they are really fitting right nicely right in the middle of that range, or even having a lot of reach schools, which doesn't mean that they won't potentially get in, but it's a stretch, a real reach to get in because they're falling at the bottom 0.25% of the applicant pool. So if you don't have a lot of these safety schools on the list as your kids are approaching their senior year, then you're not looking at enough schools that are likely to give the free merit money. Okay, so increasing, safety schools is going to give you a much better opportunity of getting more aid. So are the reach schools really worth it? I hear this all the time, right? We want our kids to go to great schools. And I assure you that even their safety schools are going to be good schools. There's great professors everywhere. The curriculum is strong at a lot of schools that aren't in the top, whatever of the rankings you're looking at. There really are amazing schools. You have to figure out which the right ones are for your student. But if they go for these reach schools and they are able to get in, don't count on any of that money you can count on need-based money, but don't count on the merit money. And it tends to be that if your student gets in, your child might be in an environment among students that typically were performing at a much higher level than they were. And in school, it might tend to be a little too competitive for them. A lot of stress. I mean, I know, we see a lot of stress for kids these days, but if they're in that environment, if all of a sudden they find themselves among a lot of the kids that are in the top 10 and 20% of their classes, and here they were at the bottom 1/4%, there's a reason that they were in the bottom 1/4% of that applicant pool. Now it might be too difficult. And that could lead to either high failure rate, high dropout rate. And in all likelihood, those kind of schools are going to cost you more money because that free money is not going to be available. So just keep that in mind. The other thing I do want to point out is a lot of kids are really high performers in their high school. And a lot of clients will come in and say, well, look, even early on, we're seeing that they're really high performers in school. And we think they're going to apply to Ivy League schools or, even that next tier of schools. And so we should get a lot of money. And then I say, well, hold on there. I just want you to know some of those top tier schools, the more elite schools, don't necessarily give merit aid. And why? One, how is it that they're going to decide who to give the merit aid to if all of their students are the top performers of their high schools? Makes it really hard to decide who to give to, right? They spend a whole lot more of their money giving more on the financial need-based side. So if you have kids that are in that caliber of student, you do want to start thinking about how are we going to get more financial need-based than merit. Okay. And if you want them to get merit, there's a whole lot of schools that would love to have them, but it just might not be the Ivies. Okay. Now, there are a lot of research studies. There's several books that really have looked at, is it really important to be, a lower student in a, more elite school? Or how does that compare to being like a top student at like a mid-level school? And Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book. He did a study called Blink. And basically he looked at how students performed after college. And then he compared, where they had gone to school. And basically at the end of the day, it comes down to the student, not the school. That those that were really like bigger fish in a small pond were really performing better because they had done more with their, opportunities at school, and it served them better later in life. So, just keep it in mind. Now, let's talk about appeal process. Everybody, I would recommend apply for financial aid. And every year, and by the way, you do have to reapply, keep that in mind. But every year, you're going to appeal if you have a good reason to appeal. Some schools have a very formal appeal process where you have to complete a document. There are certain criteria that you have to meet in order to be eligible to appeal. And some of those things could be unexpected unemployment, caring for an elderly parent, medical expenses that weren't anticipated or you couldn't afford. So those are some of the kinds of things, a death in the family. So you'll have to fill that out. But others, sometimes all it takes is calling up and very politely, always calling the financial aid officer that's assigned to your student and saying to them, listen, we got our financial aid package and we coach our clients through this, but we really might, our kids, our child really wants to attend your school. It's their number one choice, but we really need, a little bit more help. In the following years, look for X, Y, and Z reasons. We are hoping to get a little bit more financial aid. Is that possible? You want to know your EFC. You want to know how your students, compares to the others that are attending school. You're not just going to call up and ask for money without a reason, but you always should at least, come up with something and try. I have 2 kids in school. Every year I apply for financial aid, and one school is very generous sometimes and say, yeah, we'll go back and look. And the other one is like, no go. But it didn't hurt me to ask. Now, there are COVID appeals right now. A lot of the schools have separate funds because a lot of people are hurting. That may impact what people get in terms of financial aid packages going forward as they're trying to cover some of the COVID issues. So, it is a little bit of a strange time, but just know there's never harm in asking. The one other thing I will say is sometimes it makes sense if your child does have their heart set on a particular school and they don't tend to be as generous as sort of a comparable school in size, academics, et cetera. You may want to have them apply to 1 or 2 schools that they may not even really be that interested in, because sometimes those financial aid packages, if better, could be shared with the financial aid officer. And, and you could say, listen, can you come closer to this, or could you match this? My child really wants to go to school here. So keep that in mind. So, key takeaways is really not burying your head in the sand, knowing how to save, where to save, when to save, and figuring out this right college plan, right? Because there is a way to find the right kind of school, I assure you. And choosing that fit, right? Again, academic fit, social fit, financial fit. I know there were some questions, and I do look, we're sort of over our time, but we do make available to everybody that attends our workshops the opportunity to come in. I just ask this: if you would like to meet with us, again, I love meeting with people who've done the workshop. They've learned a lot, and then they have a lot of really great questions. And for the most part, if we can help you, I'm going to tell you we can help you, and I'll show you how. And if we can't, no problem. We've part friends, and I've shared some more information, but I do encourage you to make an appointment within the next 2 weeks, because we do a lot of workshops all over the country, and a lot in New Jersey, and we're busy, and I do always respect your time, and I would just appreciate that if you do make an appointment, that your spouse or significant other accompanies you, because it's always great to be on the same page. Saves a lot of time and explanation. And more importantly, that you try to keep the time that you said. If obviously there's emergency, sometimes you can let me know. But how do you get in touch with us? Well, first of all, I did mention earlier, I would love your feedback. I always like to get feedback, really. Tell me what you liked about it. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what you want to hear more of for the next time we're down the road. That's going to be in the Survey Monkey. It takes about 2 minutes. So if you could just go to the chat room, you can easily download that. Also, when there's an opportunity to sign up for a one-on-one, or you can just reach out to me at 201-463-3024, or at my email address, or my website, www.cornerstonecollegesolutions.net. There's some really great information there. We're always adding more, and feel free to sign up for additional workshops or for meetings. And I'm just going to check the chat room one time before we hang up. No, it looks like, we've basically covered all. Again, I know it's a lot to take in, and that you are probably wondering, like, what do you do with this information? Well, we can talk about it. Everybody's situation is different. So I do wish you well. I wish you health and safety during this crazy, crazy time. And again, I hope to meet you one-on-one and be able to talk specifically about your situation. But I just wish you good luck through the college process. Again, if you have young children, start now. I'll leave you with one last thing. There's a Chinese proverb that I love, and it's, when is the best time to plant a shade tree? And the answer is 20 years ago. And the same thing goes with college planning. But when's the next best time to plant a shade tree? And it's today. And that goes for college planning as well. So don't beat yourself up if you haven't done a lot. There's always things you can do. Good luck. Good luck to your children. And again, I hope to meet you soon. Kerrie, thank you so much for tonight. I really appreciate Parsippany hosting this, and I hope you all got a lot out of it.
It was really great. Thank you so much.
Oh, so welcome. Have a great night,
Yes, you
everybody.
too.
Okay.